Okay, so as you can see by the title, Freedom Politicians is doublethink. For you to understand what that means, first, it's going to be important to know what the definition of doublethink is and how it's actually lived in reality. So that's what I'm about to do now. So here we go. Doublethink is a concept from George Orwell's 1984, describing the ability to hold two contradictory beliefs simultaneously and accept both as true. It's a form of self-imposed cognitive dissonance, enabling individuals to accept falsehoods without questioning them. So, what are the key aspects of doublethink? Contradictory beliefs, accepting two opposing ideas at once, which obviously we just said a moment ago. For example, freedom is slavery. You'll hear some people actually try and sell that to you. Then you have selective memory. Now, this one's very, very common. This is pretty much the highest form of competence that you will ever see in human beings in the current structure we live in and have been living under is selective memory, right? And that is forgetting inconvenient facts while recalling others when useful. Now, you'll see that that's rampant in politics, but you'll see that in families, you'll see that in business, you'll see that in people when they get in arguments, wherever it happens to be. And that's telling you that you are immersed in a prison population because a prison population only uses truth when it's a weapon. Very rarely does it use it for liberation of all. It doesn't have that in its understanding that that's even a thing. You've got reality control, rewriting history or shifting beliefs as required by authority. And the biggest one, which is 99.99% of the population is I'm interacting with, or that I'm interacting with. Self-deception, genuinely believing contradictions without recognizing the manipulation. Now that is thick and fast, especially for people who are black-pilled, who call themselves freedom fighters or part of the freedom movement. That is huge. So obviously that's some of the work that I do here is to try and highlight what the self-deception is. Sadly, the overwhelming majority still refuse to actually take a proper look at that and where they do deceive themselves. Okay, now just before I go into reading the examples, I just want to say that where I've drawn these definitions is actually from AI. So it was just that easy. I just typed in doublethink and define it, and this is what it gave me, everything that you see right now. So it just shows you, even the masters, your masters, the ones who control how you perceive reality, are even putting this out for you to discover. It's just whether you have a willingness to actually put two and two together that makes the difference, right? So obviously I'm trying to make it as easy as I can, but I still, as the old saying goes, you can lead the horse to water, but you can't make it think. So anyway, let's read it. War is peace. Perpetual war is framed as necessary for stability, right? You'll hear that over and over again, even in the average population that buys into it. They'll just, pretty much parrot what their masters tell them. Ignorance is strength. Lack of knowledge is positioned as empowerment. I wonder how that got implanted into our minds and who would that serve? We must restrict freedom to protect freedom. Oh, that's an absolute ripper. So what was the pandemic all about, right? What did Daniel Andrews say over and over again? This is not about your rights. This is about your safety. So that in itself was a version of the same thing. Justifying authoritarian measures in the name of liberty. So doublethink is a psychological survival mechanism under oppressive systems, ensuring compliance while maintaining the illusion of free thought. Like I've been saying for I don't know how long, show me one who believes themselves to be free, and I'll show you the perfect slave. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at these two people that a fair amount in, let's call them the freedom movement, just to make it easier, referred to as freedom politicians, like that's a thing, right? Yeah, so we're going to have a look at them have an exchange. I've only grabbed the small grab, I haven't take the whole video. If you want to see the entire thing in its entirety, where you will see them actually bickering with one another, like two seagulls fighting over a chip, the title of the video I've made appear a portion of the way through, and it'll sit just above the blue section at the bottom, and that's how you can, capture that title and then type it into YouTube, and you'll be able to find it.
Now, I'm
Jared, I've
disappointed in
said
you
it
that you
before.
can't acknowledge that you have not actually stood up against free speech in this country.
Gerard, we were the first to want to enshrine free speech in the Constitution, and we made a motion in the Senate to that effect.
Okay, so if you were too busy being seduced by the idea that a saviour is here to protect your rights, then you wouldn't have grabbed it at all. So that's usually how it's done. That's generally the play of pretty much every tyrant, is the promise of protection in order for them to decide what you get to do with your life based on their standards. So basically, what you're watching here, if you're not aware, is the Game of Thrones, just a milder version of two protagonists end up challenging each other's integrity, which is pretty much what that whole series was about. How people violate one another's integrity because they believe in the idea that there is a throne and someone has the right to sit on it. And that's what these two guys are acting out right here. You can watch the full video just by typing in the title, and you'll see it play out beautifully. So now, instead of me spelling it out as to what the seduction was, as to why you might have missed it, I'm going to get Will to do that for me.
Now, the other thing, of course, is that the looming thing that people are not really noticing is this idea that we can change the Constitution through legislation. We can do away with a cornerstone of our Constitution simply by passing a piece of legislation. No, you can't do that. Yeah, and they're saying things like trial by jury. Yeah, no, it is important, but we reserve that for the most serious offences. Okay, well, who decides what the meaning of the word serious is there? See, it's a human decision. I'm not seeing anyone talking about this and correcting people and saying, no, you don't have the power and the authority to start legislating away pieces of our Constitution. And it's not just a side bit either. It's like a central pillar. It's the absolute foundation of justice and the liberties of the people.
Okay, so I'm going to play it one more time now that you've heard what Will has to say, and let's see if you pick it up this time.
Gerard, we were the first to want to enshrine free speech in the Constitution, and we made a motion in the Senate to that effect.
If you're still struggling to understand what he said and what it means you must really be struggling to understand what a constitution is. And that seems to be the sticking point of the majority of people that I come across with, especially that are so adamant they know what law is. They really don't know the true meaning of a constitution. It's to bind those who voluntarily choose to pledge, which is an oath, to serve the people in alignment with the laws of creation. That's essentially what a constitution is. It's to set the standard so everybody knows what it means to be a public servant full time, take that on and be paid for it. That's all it is. Anything that tampers with that framework is a crime. Anyone who seeks to do it, whether they've been voted in to be a representative of the people or not, doesn't make it any less of a crime. And what did Roberts say? He said they were the first to want to make an amendment to the Constitution. So he's basically saying we are criminals. That's essentially what he said. And ask yourself this: how many of those guys, those freedom politicians, will ever speak about the true constitution that Australia is still bound to, that has those principles in place that are sealed in perpetuity? You won't hear it. When you actually make any mention of that, they'll just laugh it off, or they'll actually just block you. So why? If they're really there for the people's liberties, why won't they engage like that? Now, I'm about to read you some excerpts out of a publication called The Law by Frederick Bastiat, which articulates very clearly, and he did this in the 1800s, what correct governance actually is. So here we go. Okay, so this is from Frederick Bastiat, as you can see, from 1801 to 1850. He didn't live that long. So I think he was an economist, a political commentator to memory. Really critical stuff that he wrote. So he was obviously in defense of life, liberty, and property, as opposed to the way that life was being administered, which has been for centuries, and that's through plunder. And then creating a system called the legal system that conceals the plunder and justifies it, and allows the plunderers to get away scot-free. So let's look at some of the things he's written in his publication called The Law. What then is law? It is the collective organization of the individual right to lawful defense. He doesn't say legal, see? Each of us has a natural right from God to defend his person, his liberty, and his property. These are the three basic requirements of life, and the preservation of any one of them is completely dependent upon the preservation of the other two. Really sit with that, guys. For what are faculties but the extension of our individuality? And what is property but an extension of our faculties? If every person has the right to defend, even by force, his person, his liberty, and his property, then it follows that a group of men have the right to organize and support a common force to protect these rights constantly. So what is he actually saying? That's what the actual underlying premise of having a governing administration was, for nothing else other than that. Now have a look at what it's been used for and the years that it's been leading up to where we are right now, right? That's deviated so far from its intention and its initial premise that you wouldn't even recognize it, because we've all been brought up in an actual prison, so we can't even tell what freedom is, because there's no generation that we can connect to that actually has a lived experience of living under the correct system that was meant to be in place. So what do we draw our experience from other than living in a prison? So that's why these are really foreign concepts for the overwhelming majority of people on this planet. Thus, the principle of collective right, its reason for existing, its lawfulness, is based on an individual right. Hence what Will was talking about when he said individualism. The common force that protects this collective right cannot logically have any other purpose or mission than that for which it acts as a substitute. So what that's saying is the whole reason, why there's, a constabulary is for that purpose, is to organize force for the defense of an individual right that we all have, not just some people, but all of us. And if you're going to organize that force to violate that right, well, then you are acting criminally. So there it is in black and white. Thus, since an individual cannot lawfully use force against the person, liberty, or property of another, the common force, for the same reason, cannot lawfully be used to destroy the person, liberty, or property of individuals or groups. Such a perversion of force would in both cases be contrary to our premise. So when he's saying our, what he's meaning is the whole structure of social organization through a system of public service. That's what you can garner from that. So if you're wondering why I'm doing these videos and why I've been so adamant about the Articles of Common Law that are in the Magna Carta, 1215, and how they relate to freedom, hopefully you're starting to make some links now. Because if you go back to what was written just a moment ago, or what was said in the aspects of Frederick Bastiat's work about law and governance, you'll be able to make the connection, hopefully, about the collective force. That's all that what we call government is the use of collective force to protect the individual right to life, liberty, and property. Now let's read what it says here in Article 39 as to why 39 forms part of a legitimate constitution, and that is the limits of what that force can be used for. So here we go. No free man shall be seized or imprisoned, or stripped of his rights or possessions, or outlawed or exiled, or deprived of his standing in any way, nor will we proceed with force against him, or send others to do so. So who's we in that case, right? Is it not that organised force, the system of public servants? Would it not mean that? The people who take up a full-time role to do that which we all have a responsibility to do? Except by the lawful judgment of his equals or by the law of the land. Hopefully you can see how the two are hand in glove. The work from Frederick Bastiat and what was stipulated here in Article 39. Okay, so now we're going to move on to Bastiat's section on just and enduring governance. Under such an administration, everyone would understand that he possessed both the privileges and the responsibilities of his own existence. That's self-governance right there. Right? It's a conscious awareness that we are all responsible for ourselves, not outsourcing to others, which is what people who were raised in a prison believe is freedom. And that's why we're in this dire position that we are today and have been for centuries. It's just going to get worse, as most people can see and experience if they're really honest with themselves. No one would have any argument with the government, provided that his person was respected, his labour was free, that's really, really important, that he's not being taxed for it, and the fruits of his labour were protected against all unjust attack. Now think about who takes the fruits of your labour. Think about all the taxes, right? That's legalised plunder that is imposed on you, and how much of the wealth that you create, you get to keep. If you don't understand that's the definition of slavery, when that's taken from you by coercion and force, then you're really going to struggle with the whole premise of what's actually been laid before you. Okay, let's see how many dots this connects. We would not have to thank the state for our success. Now, think about how structured success is around what people in government allow you to do, and the legislation they pass to give privileges to certain people and disadvantage to others. And conversely, when unsuccessful, we would no more think of blaming the state for our misfortune than would the farmers blame the state for hail or frost. The state would only be felt by the valuable blessings of safety provided by this concept of government. So the whole premise of social organization through public service was to protect people's integrity. That's it. Not to dictate what they are not allowed to do. Hopefully that's starting to make sense as to why what Robert said earlier about legislating, for hate crimes or protection of particular freedom of speech ideas into a constitution, why that is an outright fallacy, that is not a role that's been assigned to a system of public service. It's never been agreed upon. That's just another version of tyranny, no matter how well intended it is. As soon as you allow people who are equal to you under the law to start dictating what you can and cannot do, no matter if it's well intended or not, you have tyranny. And those people, I can bet whatever you like, will never ever come out and say those words because they're deep in it. They are part of it. That's why they're still playing out the Game of Thrones and arguing with one another, because they still believe that there is such a thing as the right to dominate and control people, to manipulate them, to, submit to your will. As long as you're voted into power, that's the magic that needs to happen that now makes you capable of having rights that don't exist in nature. So let me just finish off what it says here. Thus, serving its intended purpose, offering only the invaluable lessons of security and stability that arise from, here it goes, self-governance. Hopefully that puts the icing on the cake of why the 1215 Magna Carta, not the entire thing again, just the Articles of Common Law, because that's the only part that actually can be a constitution, because that actually articulates the standard that anyone in a system of public service must hold to in order to be legitimate. That's as simple as that, nothing more.
So we need to be really careful that we don't fall into this trap of distraction. Yeah, this is about how we govern ourselves. This is about, us being more spiritually mature. Okay, and talking about spiritual commentators out there should be on board with this. Yes, people are starting to ask, how do we envision a future system? Okay, good. It's a great question. Absolutely, we should be. But it's already been envisioned. It's already been done. The Constitution, the English Constitution, the original Constitution, is a framework for the very principles of the natural order or creation. It's the embodiment or the framework of individualism. It's the foundational principles of my rights end where another's begin. We've never quite achieved it as human beings, despite the Constitution framing it.
Okay, so it's really enjoyable to see Will finally move into this space about the link between people who claim spirituality and to have some knowledge around it, yet they leave out the fundamental essence of what's necessary for spirituality to even be experienced to its fullest. So far, the version we get is a very individualistic, as far as self-indulgent version, where there's no link to the conditions that we live under that prevent the flourishing of people to spiritually develop. So what I'm talking about is commentators such as your Ram Dass, your Alan Watts, your Eckhart Tolle, your Teal Swans, even get down to someone like Abraham Hicks, and then you've got your Tibetan monks that come out to America and make a name for themselves. The people that speak really slowly, softly, they take a pause, so like they've got that air of contemplation around them. I'm yet to hear them mention the human condition of slavery. There's alluding to it, but there's never an overt connection to that. Not to the level that Mark Passio will go to. So why is that? That's the question that needs to be asked. The amount of people I've met that believe spirituality is whether they have like a near-death experience and they cross over and then they come back, or something to do with DMT astounds me. That's what they actually believe. And if you don't have that experience, you'll hear that you don't know what spirituality is, right? That takes out the interconnectedness of life. So all life is interconnected. So you cannot have your own individuated, what you call, I'm going to call it a self-indulgent experience, and then expect that spirituality while everyone else is enslaved. That to me is a very narrow view and a very narrow understanding for what true spirituality is, and that's the uplift of all life forms. Right? And if you're not working towards that, then you're just working for your own self-indulgence. It's essentially as I've come to understand it. Hence why, if you're not imparting knowledge to lift the conscious floor of all beings, then you're actually concealing something, right? And it's for a personal gain for some reason. That's generally what it comes down to. So that's why I love the fact that Will's now starting to call that part out. So, and how there's a link to the 1215 Magna Carta, the common law articles that exist in there, because they actually, as he says, they frame the conditions that are necessary for people to actually evolve in consciousness. Because if you're constantly under duress, you think about it, right? When you're driving down the street, I'm using the word driving, so don't jump off the cliff first before I finish, if you're all touchy about the meaning of words. And you see a police officer or a bunch of police cars behind you, tell me you don't go into some kind of form of panic, whether it's mild anxiety or outright panic, right? Why would that be the case, right? Because you know that they are violators. You intuitively understand what they do, and that is to violate your integrity. Whether you are half asleep, fully asleep, or believe you're awake, the experience is no different viscerally. And so if you're living under those conditions, how can you possibly spiritually evolve? If you're constantly being taken for the fruits of your labor if you don't have any certainty over the choices that you want to make for your own life direction, especially if it's not going to harm anyone else, right? And you're hampered and thwarted by bureaucratic red tape, tell me how you can possibly spiritually evolve. Explain that. So until there's a connection made between how every aspect of life needs to be aligned with the freedom of choice, with whoever you interact with, if there isn't a conscious awareness of, my rights end where yours begin and vice versa, it's not the driving force, how are you going to evolve? Because you're constantly in fear. Fear doesn't allow you to evolve, right? The fear is so deep that it's actually come down to the point of being in intimate relationships. And people believe that the fear that they have in their relationships, they actually conflate that with love. That's what happens when you're born in an invisible prison. You cannot tell the difference. You do not have a clear understanding of the difference between fear and love. There's a massive conflation. So bravo to Will for bringing that up. I'm really pleased that he did that.
Yeah, but there is no other way. It's not a choice. Anything else is control. Yeah, there's no other version, if you like, or alternative to a philosophy of minding your own business. Don't interfere. Don't remove another's choices. That's the ideology of individualism, or voluntarism, if you like. That's what the English Constitution frames. So an alternative is to descend into kind of tribalism, which would be regressive. That would be going backwards. And that's what's happening right now. We're getting pulled into camps. We're getting pulled into extreme prejudicial positions. Yeah, instead of taking the responsible position of self-governance, understanding complexity, and being okay with nuance, and taking a genuinely moral path. Yeah, that's what the Constitution does for us. It's a framework for doing that. Yeah, people get sort of allergic to the word constitution. Why? Because they automatically make the mistake that it forms a state. Well, no, it doesn't. That's the extraordinary thing about a legitimate constitution. The English Constitution was a legitimate one under natural law, meaning that it works in harmony with the natural order. It attempts to keep in place the Creator's intentions for man. It preserves rights as fundamental rights. How does it do that? It does it by the people governing themselves through the jury. There is no government in the normal sense of the word. Yeah, the English Constitution is a framework for natural justice if it's embodied authentically and understood properly. Yeah, and this is why anarchists, frankly, you need to get a grip and come on board and support this. Yeah, why are you ignoring this? There are many anarchists out there who understand and support the principle of trial by jury. In fact, many of you guys, anarchists, get this best of all, but you're ignoring this. You can't go from big state to no state in one go. There will always be a transitionary phase. Yeah, the country that governing itself through the people's own court of conscience is the embodiment of responsibility. That leads to healing due to that self-reflective element, the practice of exercising your moral compass. It's a win-win situation. Why would you not support it? That's what it creates. Complete win-win. Why? Because we get to do two things in particular. We get to put the government back in its box. Why? Because the people are governing in that situation. And we get to raise our own consciousness by exercising conscience, common sense, reason and logic. And that leads to the evolution of man and the embodiment of true sovereignty.
Okay, so I just want to add a dimension to what Will's explaining here in a way that might help the information that he's sharing land a bit easier. So just think about when you were a child and you would, ask your mum or dad or whoever your carer was at that given moment, can I have this? Can I have that? And they'd say no. And you go, why? And they'd say something like, well, I can't afford it. I don't have the money. And you're like, what does that even mean? You don't even understand. All you don't understand is you want it and you're not getting it. And there's some, they're the reason why you're not getting it. You don't have any concept of this impediment called money. And it's not until you need to actually go into an experience where you need to exchange your precious time, energy, and labor to get this thing called money in return. So then you can go and use that thing called money to get what you really need, right? Something tangible that's going to actually preserve your life or advance it in some kind of way, or just meet a basic need, right? Another experience is, like, let's say some child let's say most people call them a brat, right? And, why do they call them that? Because they don't get their needs for respect met when they're in their company, right? There's some kind of trampling of consideration and respect and honesty, etc., happening. And so let's say that child, for example, you might witness them actually build something that they really care about, and then it gets knocked over and they fully flip out. Or, they've actually cleaned their room for the first time in their life for whatever reason, and then someone else will drop some kind of little bit of mess in there and they'll flip out, right? Yet the majority of the time they've been doing the same themselves. And why is that? Because they never put in the labor. They didn't put in their precious time, energy into doing something that they previously didn't have an awareness of why you'd even do that. So whether they did it because they were forced to or they were afraid, they still did it, right? The child will still go and do something, regardless of its reasons. So now it has an attachment to what they've done in a way that they couldn't before. So being on a jury is the same thing. Until you're actually taking full responsibility for really thinking deeply to the consequences of what choice you're about to make and how it's going to impact another individual, you will never, ever be able to evolve. Those conditions are necessary for you to evolve in your conscious awareness. So hopefully that's making sense if you can relate it back to specifics in your own life of things you've seen, where in the past you didn't care until you got involved. Just like, most kids won't understand why their parents lose it at them when they don't put things back where they got them from, because they don't understand what it means to put in the labor, to put in the effort, what that does when it's not respected. So yeah, I just wanted to give that extra nuance.
So let's stop focusing on effects and getting distracted and being pulled into things that matter less at the expense of the critical. And then we'll make some progress.
Okay, so if you've made it to the end, hopefully now you have a much clearer understanding of why the term freedom politician is an oxymoron. It's doublethink, it's a delusion, and you're actually possibly open, fingers crossed, to actually learning the truth about what's required to actually get rid of the level of tyranny that's been in play and is going to get worse until each individual takes their moral responsibility seriously and starts actuating their sovereignty through educating themselves first, then taking the action based on that knowledge, and then helping others understand too. If that's where you are and you want to actuate your autonomous capacity to do so, then magnacarta1215.com is waiting for you to discover. It's got a ton of resources. It's going to require some kind of patience on your part. And also, if you're stuck, there's always people willing to help, so you can reach out through there. I just want to finish off saying that when Will talks about the English Constitution, he's actually talking about the Magna Carta 1215.